part of the Modern Transformations lecture, we're going to look at how modern ideals and ideas spread and what happened to them, specifically as they moved through Scandinavian countries. And right at the end of the lecture, we'll also look at a few Brazilian examples. The first designer we'll talk about is Erik Gunnar Asplund. He's considered one of the leading architects in Scandinavia during the 20th century, and many would argue that his influence is strongly felt there today. Among Asplund's most famous early works are a series of villas, a courthouse, and a small chapel. We'll also see, I will focus on a library project and a landscape project where he was the co-designer. He did most of the architecture, and there was a landscape designer who worked with him, but you'll see that it's very much an integrated project. The buildings and his work really decisively highlight Swedish neoclassicism. And as the chief architect for the Stockholm exhibition of 1930, we also see him moving from that neoclassicism into a leading introducer of functionalist architecture in Sweden. We're going to start with this woodland cemetery project. This landscape has been considered one of the most inspired of the 20th century. The eminent architectural historian Mark Trebe has even gone so far as to describe this haunting setting as, quote, the most perfect and profound modern landscape on the planet, unquote. The woodland cemetery is a result of a unique collaboration between Sweden's two most famous architects, Erik Gunnar Asplund and Sigurd Lewerentz, who is also trained as a landscape architect. As you'll see in the next few slides, this is neither a landscaped garden cemetery in the English tradition, nor a city of the dead, which one finds in the Mediterranean or Islamic traditions. This was something uniquely new, an apparently natural forest setting in which the importance of the individual graves is subsumed within the larger impact of the woodlands and sweeping meadows. In fact, as you can see in this view, no graves are visible at all. And this continues until one reaches the main chapel, and only then can you see the graves in the distance, dotted among the pine trees. It just looks like a vast rolling landscape with deep forests beyond. The sheer luxury of this space is impressive. In fact, a full third of the entire cemetery is given over to this imposing empty landscape, long curves and high skies, evocative of the Swedish landscape with its barrows and sacred groves. Centered on the site of a former quarry, the cemetery occupies over 100 hectares, most of which is heavily planted with pine forest, and then within which, as you can see in this image, you can see graves, and they're located at regular, though not mathematical, intervals. Many critics have drawn attention to how absolutely different this cemetery is from the classical, highly formalized cemetery, in which the visitor's emotions were highly regulated by the formality of the setting. In contrast, the Stockholm Woodland Cemetery is meant to evoke feelings of landscapes of many different sorts, such as hope and happiness, sorrow and despair, death and resurrection. It is an environment that is designed to be full of feelings that facilitate contact between the inner and outer landscapes. The cemetery is extensive and inviting. Long forest paths cut through the woodland with distant views of Greek column chapels and sudden openings with circular garden settings and water. There are tens of thousands of small headstones in these woodland forests. Asplund was primarily responsible for the architecture and Lewerentz the landscape design. However, we know that they worked together on every aspect of the planning, where to place buildings, what the approach should look like, and how building and landscape could be integrated. In this way, the woodland cemetery is considered a shining example of the designed experience, meaning that the design is created with the visitor's experience in mind. So when the designers planned the landscaping in the buildings, they started from the perspective of the visitor and the concept of mourning and the feelings surrounding it. This is expressed in various ways. For example, the processional routes leading to the chapels are designed to create the appropriate mood for mourners prior to the funeral service. After the service, attention is drawn to the natural surroundings to help reconcile the mourners with the sadness of their loss as part of the circle of life. The clearest example is the Seven Springs Way leading up to the Chapel of Resurrection. At a length of 888 meters, the stunning Seven Springs Way runs straight from the Meditation Grove to the Chapel of Resurrection. It moves along an old boundary line, and the path is intended for mourners to follow when attending a funeral service at the Chapel of Resurrection. The path is lined with weeping birches, then ordinary birches, followed by pines and finally spruces. The idea behind the different trees is that the path becomes increasingly dark the further along the mourners go, causing them to become more and more melancholy as they approach the chapel. After the ceremony, the mourners are let out of the chapel's west door and take a different path back. This leads them down into a dip through other plantings, so that the mourners can be drawn into a different mood. This is meant to help the mourner let go of their grief and gradually return to their normal lives. At various points on the site, the visitor passes through gates, doorways, or planted thresholds that emphasize the passage of time and are symbolic of the passage to the afterlife. The processional route through the trees to the woodland chapel is carefully considered as well. The woods immediately surrounding the building are considerably denser, which helps the mourners into the right frame of mind. Inside, the chapel is illuminated by light from the circular dome, which creates a different atmosphere again. You'll note that the architecture is a pared-down neoclassicism, very, very basic, almost primitive. Also, in looking at the plan, you should see the Platonic forms. Again, geometry and rationalism are reigning here. That's the circle within a square. Another example of the design experience is the steps up to the Meditation Grove. The higher you come up the steps, the lower each step becomes. This is so that visitors are not tired out by the climb, instead feeling calm when they reach this place of meditation. Just as the exterior spaces are carefully designed, so are the interior. Here's just one example, and you can see the laminate wall curves and bends and becomes a bench. No detail is left unconsidered. The landscaping at the Woodland Cemetery is unique and utterly unlike other cemeteries of this period or any. The Woodland Cemetery is clearly influenced by the spirit of the time, the zeitgeist, with its Swedish romanticism of gentle hills, space, and openness. The beautiful natural features are carefully designed to offer healing to mourners. Nature guides the visitor through the funeral ceremony and then gradually back into their own lives again. A unity, a designed unity, that echoes the eternal cycle of life and death. Moving on now to another project by Asplund. This is the Stockholm City Library. And what should strike you instantly is a very clear geometry. But first, a word about public library. So you have seen the Labrousse libraries in Paris. And the idea of library and public access is one that was very seductive and we see spreading, not just through Europe, but also Scandinavia and the New World. Asplund was initially hired to help determine the requirements for a public library and then prepare a competition brief open to any architects. Beginning his research in the United States, Asplund saw firsthand examples of the most developed library systems in the world. He became very informed, and when the building committee realized the strength that he had in his understanding, they decided that he, in fact, would make the most suitable architect for the job. The site of the library rests beside a steep hill, which influenced the designs that Asplund worked through from the beginning of the process. He did not want the library to be overwhelmed or overpowered by its environment, and decided to have a very strong, compact, orange-colored mass, a form that would certainly hold its own within this context. He was sure that the building would be heavy and massive, and he deliberated on multiple different organizational schemes. While the library was being constructed, Asplund entered and won a competition to design the park adjacent to the library site. He envisioned a large rectilinear pond surrounded with flowing streams and waterfalls, although the final design was modified to be more practical. The building committee also asked him to design the market hall, though this portion of the project was never built. The library itself is remarkable. It's remarkable for its classic style, which we can see immediately in the plan and then looking inside the main landing reading room. The neoclassical composition of the parterre is clear. The interior reading room forms a square with an open courtyard in the center of the library, which is almost entirely filled by this round lending hall. Beginning as a dome, the lending hall eventually becomes a tall cylinder for structural, economical, and formal reasons. The only points of accessibility to the central area of the library, this lending room, are found at the 4 tangent points, as you can see in plan. The processional entrance to the library is found at the end of a dramatic staircase and is marked by high walls of polished black stucco, which direct and funnel your vision upward. Walls along the circular courtyard in all levels are lined with books in beautifully detailed wooden bookcases. As the eye continues up the interior, a contrasting rough stucco wall juts upwards towards the top of the cylinder, where the room is filled with light through the high clerestory window. The hanging chandelier, made of white opalescent glass, is upwardly concaved, allowing it to capture light from the windows and take on an intense glow as it becomes a focal point in the vast open space. The classic style of the architecture is revealed here as well, and you'll notice the arrangement of books reinforces that rational circular geometry. A little side note, the library does have a children's area, and this fairy tale room has a painting of the Sandman soaring under his umbrella. The painting is done by artist Niles Dardell. So in the examples we've seen so far from Asplund, we've seen that focus of a refined, simplified neoclassicism. The next project sees him moving away from this. In this drawing, we can see his design for an advertising tower. This was the signature element in his scheme for the 1930 Stockholm exhibition, which marked the introduction of functionalist architecture to Scandinavia. The theme of the 1930 exhibition was housing, transportation, furnishing, and it focused on industrial responses to the needs of Sweden's growing middle class. The exhibition committee sent Asplund on a tour of continental Europe in the autumn of 1928 for design inspiration. Upon his return to Sweden, Asplund designed the complex in the modernist international style, quite a radical departure from the classicism of his earlier projects. The tower recalls similar designs by Russian constructivists, but rather than revolutionary or political slogans, Asplund's tower supports advertisements for chocolates, scarves, radios, and other items from major manufacturers. And here you can see the final project at the exhibition in 1930. And you can see again a close-up view. This example of the international style coming to Sweden for the first time. So if Asplund explored neoclassicism and then introduced functionalism to Sweden, our next designer, Alvar Aalto, bridges a different kind of gap, that between art and science. He's one of Finland's most famous designers, and he was interested in functionality, but also the organic relationship between man, nature, and building. Alvar Aalto is often called the father of modernism in Scandinavian countries. Just a little bit about him. His father was a government surveyor, and we know that Aalto accompanied his father on surveying trips during the summer months when he was out of school. He studied at the Helsinki University of Technology and graduated with a degree in architecture in 1921. We know that Aalto also worked in Sweden and had projects in various places in Scandinavia. A little side note. Aalto and his first wife, architect Eino Marcio, had their honeymoon in Italy. The Mediterranean culture made a profound influence on Aalto's creativity. It blended with his Nordic intellect and remained important to his visionary works for the rest of his life. The simple massing and ornamentation of northern Italy translated into Aalto's style with its balanced proportions, harmonious volumes, and sparse decorations. An early project won by Aalto in 1927 is the Municipal Library in Viipuri. During the development of the site, the site was changed from being beside a main road to being within this park, a change which allowed Aalto to open up the building to light on all sides. The walls of the building contain a forced air ventilation system, which confirmed Aalto's concern for technical matters. And it is this bridging of the technical and the aesthetic that we will see in all of Aalto's projects. 30-inch thick exterior walls contain ventilation ducts and mechanical piping, and radiant heating is provided with hot water pipes. Here's the entry hall. Notice the transparency and layers of glass. Also the aesthetic, very whitewashed walls, and the use of metal and glass in doors and also in the screening walls of the staircase. You'll also notice in the section the double height space of the reading room. It has, in cross-section, you can see 6-foot diameter round conical skylights. These reflect incoming sunlight to produce a shadow-free diffuse light. Artificial light was designed also to provide the same diffuse, shadowless light, which was believed to be best for reading. And here you can see within the space itself what those skylights looked like. Again, the space should strike you as being very rational, very organized, very symmetrical. Aalto himself said it was inspired by the mountainscapes and sunlight. Perhaps the most famous room in this building, and maybe of all of Aalto's work, is the lecture hall. And it's certainly the most celebrated acoustic form of early modern movement. This wavy lecture hall ceiling is an important detail, a real masterpiece. And it also provides a forerunner for his later design vocabulary, which returns in many forms, that of the curve. Here, however, there's little doubt that Aalto was sincere about the acoustic intentions, since there's a series of sections, like the one I'm showing you here, which have been preserved and explore the path of reflection between the speaker and audience, and for various different positions of the speaker. Furthermore, leading historians of the period were prepared to take him at his word. Siegfried Gideon claimed, quote, "Of course, the architect himself can prove with meticulous acoustic diagrams that the undulating form he gave the ceiling enables sound to reach the human ear more perfectly. Here, therefore, scientific reasoning and artistic imagination have merged to free architecture from that rigidity which is today an ever-present menace." Unquote. Today we know that the acoustics do not work as well as Alto had hoped. However, for that time, his ideas and thinking of integrating functionalism, the technical requirement of sound, and, of course, aesthetics within one comprehensive design was really revolutionary. And that curve, the way of having a variety, a vocabulary of curves, is one that Alto would go on to exploit imaginatively later in his work. It's related to the human body and its movements, for example, his ergonomic handrails. Also the new technology of laminating wood that is used in his furniture. In composing buildings, the curves allow special moments and points of focus, and they're nearly always used in contrast with a rectilinear form. Another important project of Alto's is the tuberculosis sanatorium in Paimio, Finland. This is nestled in the wood in southwestern Finland, and it was completed in 1933. This former tuberculosis sanatorium is both a work of art and science, again bridging the aesthetic and functional. Alto considered it a cathedral to health and an instrument for healing. So the building itself is an instrument. Alto's design, which was the winning entry for a 1929 competition, succeeds on both a macro and micro scale, seamlessly integrating the forested landscape with the architectural site plan and the interiors. Incredible care that went into Alto's fully articulated layout Alto's fully articulated layout, which includes dramatic balconies. This is because plenty of rest and sunshine was thought to be the best cure for tuberculosis. A double-height cafeteria, meeting rooms, a chapel, public spaces, staff housing, and walking trails throughout the surrounding forests. As you can see in this bird's eye, there are a lot of forests. So the integration of building and landscape was thought to be an essential part of this instrument of health. The sanatorium was also the first building Alto designed that was furnished entirely with his own factory-made furniture. In Alto's entry for the competition, the buildings were grouped in a neoclassical manner, with the sun balconies representing a more modern architectural approach. He laid out the plan in a branch pattern, with the two main patient wings reaching out along a north-south axis. Each department occupied a separate wing, and the wings radiated from the center at different angles, determined by the direction of sunlight and the views. In this way, the building was maximally exposed to both the morning and afternoon sun. He also used a steel structural frame to make these wings very tall and thin, with expansive windows along both sides. If you look on the image on the right, you can see that very slender, elegant, sort of attenuated building profile. Again, it's almost just like a screen so that light and sun could do their healing work for the patient's house within. You can see here too in the section, it's a vertical cantilever. The buildings were made of steel reinforced concrete as the primary load-bearing structure. And reinforced concrete frame is fully exposed and fully exploited aesthetically. It's very muscular, yet very graceful. Alto and his first wife, Aino, crafted all of the facility's furniture. Here, for example, is a bentwood chair, and the angle that was chosen was one that was believed to be the most positive for the breathing and the lungs of a tuberculosis patient. The patient's rooms themselves received particular consideration. Because each space was originally designed to house two convalescents, Alto created special no-splash sinks that would allow users to wash without disrupting the other. Lighting is located up high or down low, never at sight lines, which is thought to be stressful. Soothing, non-glare colors are utilized throughout the building. For example, pale yellow staircases and soothing blue common spaces. All of these choices were made based on color theory at the time, an emerging science. And of course, the windowed rooms connected to the landscape. A building for the ill was meant to become an inspiration for life. Albert Aalto embraced many nuanced dualities through his career. He did not try to suppress the dual nature of the architect, the disparity between rationalism and spiritual will. Instead, he found a way to create spaces that served people on a very sensual scale. Aalto did what many master architects attempt to do, and that is to design with the total union of aesthetics and function in mind. Science and art. Function, utility, but also aesthetics. And here, of course, we see on the top walkway area of a sanatorium that wonderful curve intersecting with what is otherwise quite a rectilinear building. These types of elements weave through the structure and prevent it from being overly clinical and an overly functionalist space. The design of Albert Aalto's town hall is generally regarded as a major transitional event in a Finnish architect's career. This is where we see his work move away from the sort of more anonymous cubic typology of the international style, even with his curves, to a more site-specific and humanistic approach that incorporates the tectonic ideals of modernist form, but with history and vernacular woven in. The design of the town hall was influenced by both Finnish vernacular architecture and humanist Italian Renaissance. It was the Italian Renaissance from which Aalto drew inspiration for the courtyard arrangement, which informed the name of his original competition entry entitled Curia. While the main program of the building is housed within a heavy brick envelope, the courtyard, as you can see in the image on the left, is bordered by a glass-enclosed circulation space which can be linked to the model of the arcade-bordered piazza. Aalto chose an irregular geometry, a U-shaped building with a square center, all similar to those in Western Europe at the turn of the century. This defines the space, and it allows all of the programmatic elements within to operate effectively. Another distinctive feature is the grass stairs, which complement a regular set of stairs adjacent to the town council chamber. The grass stairs also evoke notions of ancient Greece and Italian architecture through the establishment of a form that resembles a simple amphitheater condition. The town hall's main programmatic feature are the council chambers. This is a double-height space which is capped by the Aalto-designed butterfly trusses seen in the middle image. This space is approached from the main entrance hall a floor below via a ramp, which wraps around the main tower structure under a row of clear-story windows, as you can see on the left. Aalto constrained his material palette to one dominated by brick and accented by timber and copper. Though Aalto practiced at the same time as modernist architects like Corbusier and others, he rejected the machine aesthetic for the majority of his architecture. Instead, he saw his buildings as organisms made up of individual cells. This principle informed Aalto's use of traditional building materials such as brick, which is, by nature, cellular. The bricks were even laid slightly offline to create a dynamic and enlivened surface condition. One of the most beautiful elements in the project is light. Whether in the city council meetings or the hallways, every room has its own unique lighting condition, specifically built to maximize an effect. So, to sort of wrap up Aalto here, we see functionalism and a synthetic attitude were important in his evolution from a Nordic classicism toward modernism. He created a very unique and personal way of converging forms, materials, and purposes of his building on the rationale of their functionality, aesthetics, and use. They needed to work well. Another domestic project, a residence, is seen here in the Villa Maria. And we could see again that mix of sort of traditional and modern architecture. This was built as a guest house and also was given free rein to express different textures and different historical references in the project. From above and in the plan, you can see that the building is roughly an L shape, starts to turn the corner, and this is to maximize light and also to frame a private sort of backyard condition. There's also a wall extending into the distance, and this helped to continue that framing of the more private yard area. In this project, we can also see that shifting theme of technology and organicism in Aalto's design. The transformation of materials and therefore the experiences created by them forms fences and then walls and around and through the villa. Starting at a shorter mound of compacted dirt, and it rises to a fence roughly woven together from long sticks. This irregularity arises as it lengthens, and the sticks become more directional and linear till it merges with the wooden walls of the grass roof sauna, which continues on to form the roof of the outdoor space and walkway. In this description, what I'm hoping to emphasize is the continuity of the different elements. Nothing is left to chance. If you look here at the awning that's over the doorway, you'll notice the support system is made up of a screening of vertical poles. These reflect the pines of the forest that is adjacent to the home. And this motif is then carried into the house. And the same concept of the morphing technology continues throughout the home as materials shift from a stone to a stone slab to glass and steel. From the front door to the inside of the house, the materiality of the floor also changes as it becomes progressively more domestic and intimate, from stone to tile to timber, boarding, and finally rugs. The next designer we'll look at briefly is Eliel Saarinen. He was an established Finnish architect and designer who settled in the United States in 1922 and was a progenitor of an American modernism that really built on the interplay between art, architecture, nature, and science. So some of those themes we've seen already with Aalto. Saarinen possessed a unique ability to work as though he were customizing the design to fit the culture. He established, and you may be familiar with it, the pioneering graduate program at the Cranbrook Academy of Art in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. This school attracted, among others, Charles and Ray Eames, Harry Bertoia, Florence Knoll, and Saarinen's own son, Eero, all of whom had a hand in shaping the mid-century design in the United States. A little bit about Saarinen. He studied painting and architecture at Helsinki University and had an established practice there. They created the Finnish Pavilion for the 1900 World's Fair in Paris and worked on a number of other high-profile projects in Finland. In 1922, Saarinen received a small windfall of money for his second prize entry to the contest to design the Chicago Tribune Tower. With these funds, he moved to the States with his wife Loya, a textile designer. He came to sort of test the waters of the American design climate. His project for the Chicago Tribune Tower attracted such attention that he was hired almost immediately to teach at the University of Michigan Architecture School by Emil Lorch. There, he happened to have a student who was the son of George Booth, the founder and owner of the Cranbrook educational community. And through these connections, Saarinen was hired to design the master plan and the buildings for Cranbrook. I'm not going to spend a lot of time looking at all of these different projects, but encourage you, if you're not familiar with Cranbrook, to look at their website, and if you're in Michigan and near Lawrence Tech, to go and visit the campus and take one of their tours. This particular building you're seeing here is the original group of buildings. This is the boys' school, and it's organized in a quadrangle fashion. You can see that here. It's a mix of vernacular and European styles, a lot of brick, warm colors, the use of historical features and decorations, stained glass, leaded glass windows, sculpture. This was meant to be an immersive environment of beauty. Saarinen's own home is part of the Art Academy, what we call Faculty Way. And this particular building, again, look at it. You can see the chevron design of the brick. You can see different brickwork. You'll also notice the leaded glass has a very specific pattern, but there's very little other decoration. It's the quality of the material and how they're used that really adds up to the aesthetic impression of the building. On the inside, this continues. And here we can see even more expressively the Scandinavian influence. So for example, the couch or sofa, this is a Scandinavian style where a rug is affixed to the wall and it drapes over a horizontal member to create a kind of couch. The tapestry, the floor, rugs, all of these were designed by Eliel Saarinen's wife Loja, and in fact his daughter Pipson and son Eero also were involved in some of the design on the Cranbrook campus. It's worth noting that the tiles around the fireplace, which are Puabic tiles, this is one of the only instances where Detroit Puabic Tile Company produced tiles that were designed by someone else, in this case Eliel Saarinen. A few other images from the Saarinen house, and you'll notice the chevrons from the leaded glass windows are picked up in the marquetry on the side of the furniture, and in the boudoir ensemble, the lights and mirrors for Mrs. Saarinen in the upstairs bedroom. This is ultimately really the total work of art, where every single element is designed and considered as part of the aesthetic whole. Saarinen also designed the girls' school, or what is called Kingswood School. You'll see it here. Again, you see still that brick. There are some significant differences, however. This whole ensemble was conceived of as a whole, so we do not have the quadrangle system. In fact, there's no need to exit one building to enter another. All of the buildings are interconnected around open spaces. And while the bricks are similar to what we saw at the boys' school, you'll also notice the use of the clear story windows, long horizontal bands. There's a clear influence coming from the prairie style of Frank Lloyd Wright, and perhaps Saarinen's own development, because in this case, this project, Kingswood School, is a blank slate. There's nothing there before, whereas the boys' school had been built on the site of an old farm. So in Eliel Saarinen, in Asplund, and in Aalto, we see the way modernism is explored. Quite a bit of variety in these different Scandinavian countries, and how they are sort of testing and bridging between the technical and the aesthetic, the social, the functional, and also the sort of sensual aspect of design. We're going to move now quite briefly to Brazil, and specifically to look at a couple of projects by the designer Oscar Niemeyer. He's a celebrated Brazilian architect. He is known for his flowing modernist designs, and for, instead of designing sort of a white cube or box, for adding a sort of new sensuality that really captured the imaginations of architects working in this period. He was best known probably for designing the government buildings in Brasilia, which was the new capital carved out of the Brazilian savannah. But the projects we'll look at today, I want to focus more on the sort of lyrical forms that helped to shape a distinct national architecture and modern identity in Brazil that was linked to European modernism and international style, yet also very separate. Even his lesser works are a beautiful counterpoint to sort of the reductive modernist architecture. You know, this is not bland functionalism. We'll start by looking at the Brazil Pavilion, which was built for the 1939 New York World's Fair. This was a collaborative work with Lucia Costa. The building itself, which you can see in the image and also in the plan, was built in just 5 months, and it's a small 3-story structure. It's built on an I plan, and it frames a small lake in the rear. It's raised partly on pilotis, and it has quite an unusual brise-soleil on the front facade, sort of like a miniature version of one that might be used in Brazil. The pavilion is dominated by a wide, curving pedestrian ramp that scooped up visitors to the first floor, and from there they pass through a generous curving entrance hall with a small bar serving coffee, to a series of stands showing off Brazilian commercial products: coffee, nuts, chocolate, tobacco, cotton, and palm oil. Elsewhere, there is a formal exhibition hall with paintings by Portinari, and a magnificent curving bar specializing in various local foods, and finally a circular dance hall. And you can see these marked off quite well in the plan in the upper right corner of the slide. Now, let's keep in mind that as with all of the World's Fairs that we've looked at, the pavilion's purpose was propagandistic, right? Namely, the promotion of trade and culture and good relations. But the Brazilian pavilion represented this kind of soft diplomacy with exuberance. And some might even say that it's a decidedly erotic building. It's full of curves, which up to that point was highly unusual in a modernist building. It was profoundly conscious of the body of the visitor, leads them around the building, providing invitations to pause or linger. From the outside, the pavilion's starting point may have been the modernist language that we've seen, say, with someone like Le Corbusier, so we've got the pilotis and the ramp, but the sensuality of the program helped define a distinctive and decidedly Brazilian form of modernism. Here you can see closer up of the brise-soleil. Brise-soleil literally means sunbreak, so this is a type of screen that allowed hot Brazilian sun to be diffused. In this case, of course, it's in New York, but they're showing a more vernacular architecture. From the second floor, which is accessible via this ramp, visitors view a beautiful tropical garden around the lake in the rear, with an unusual collection of Brazilian plants. Another project of 1940 sees Niemeyer commissioned to build a series of buildings around an artificial lake at Pampulha, which is a suburb of Belo Horizonte. That was the state capital of Minas Gerais. These buildings, which included a church dedicated to St. Francis of Assisi, a casino, a restaurant, dance hall, and yacht club, brought Niemeyer international fame. The church is made up of 4 undulating concrete parabolas with a roof, which make up the roof over a T-shaped plan. Vertical side walls are faced with painted tile murals, as you can see in these photographs. The outer screen wall on the north side is finished with azuelo tiled mural depicting scenes from the life of St. Francis. The azuelo tile is important. These actually came from Portugal. And when the Portuguese colonized Brazil, they brought these tiles with them. With its slender tower that tapers toward its base like a chair leg, this building is one of the most emblematic of Brazilian modernism. The use of concrete, the parabola, the math, the rationalism, yet at the same time, that sort of sensual undulating light that is natural or more organic. You can also see the use of wood facing the interior of the building. So the parabola is concrete on the outside, but on the inside we see sort of more natural, warmer woods, and also this bright light shining on the image of St. Francis in the apse. So in conclusion, as we've seen in these examples from the first lecture in the United Kingdom and then the second half from Scandinavia and Brazil, modern architecture was emulated and transformed extensively as it spread globally. In most cases, the austere character of the international style was softened and made unique by an integration with local vernacular.